Today we have some updates on the situation between Jesse Puljujarvi and the Edmonton Oilers, Loui Eriksson and the Vancouver Canucks, as well as Jason Zucker and the Minnesota Wild. We'll get into all the latest news coming up next. Welcome back here to Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have some other news around the NHL I want to discuss today, and I want to get started first with the Minnesota Wild and the situation around Jason Zucker. So as we know with the Minnesota Wild, when Paul Fenton was the general manager, he tried and ultimately failed to trade Jason Zucker on multiple occasions. First at the NHL trade deadline to the Calgary Flames. Then, of course, there was a deal in place earlier this offseason with the Penguins involving Phil Kessel, which Kessel ultimately nixed due to his no trade clause. So obviously he was not successful in trading him. And this comes a very short time after signing him to over a 5-year contract, over $5 million per year, after Jason Zucker put up career numbers with the Wild the year previous. So it certainly should not come as any surprise now that Fenton is out as GM, that Craig Leopold, as part of the process of firing Fenton, reached out to almost all the players on the team, talking to many of them about the situation. And I know a couple guys he was talking to, especially were guys like Zucker and Zach Parise, who'd been mentioned a lot in NHL trade rumors and the rumor mill here in the last number of weeks and months. Now, obviously, I think it's pretty fair to say now that Jason Zucker is probably one of the most relieved players around the league, that Fenton is no longer in control of the Wild. I don't think he's going to be going anywhere. So now I think we can finally take this NHL trade rumor and put it to bed. I'm not sure why Paul Fenton was so obsessed with trading this guy. He's been a heart and soul type of player for this team. He's very quick. He's been able to provide a fair bit of scoring, which is something that they don't have a ton of. And he's not overly old as well. So it's kind of confusing with Paul Fenton's reign as GM, what direction he was going. Some of the moves he was looking to make made them younger. Other moves made them older. There really wasn't a clear-cut direction if they were rebuilding. What were they doing? I'm not even sure he really knew. I think he was kind of flying by the seat of his pants on most days, just trying to find whatever deals he could. And we've seen all kinds of reports that come out around the Wild and Fenton and all the kind of weird things going on behind the scenes here since that's ultimately taking place and he's been dismissed. So for right now, I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of activity out of the Minnesota Wild. I think a lot of the other rumors, like I said, we've seen about Jason Zucker, even Zach Parise that we talked about, and even as early as last week, there was a lot of reports that Fenton was shopping him, and we've seen some interviews with Parise saying he didn't really know how to feel, that hockey in Minnesota was tough right now, but of course that he'd love to be able to stay, work it out, ultimately win a Stanley Cup there. He's getting older, his days are kind of numbered, probably doesn't have too many years left in the NHL and all that stuff, and really at this point, I think things are definitely going to be very different. Until they get a new general manager in place, I don't see either of these guys being moved, and I think all things are likely going to be quiet on that front with the Minnesota Wild until they hire their new GM and they can get a feel for what the new direction of the team is going to be, and they sort all that out with ownership. Obviously, right now, Assistant General Manager Tom Kurvers is in control right now while they do that search. I don't see Tom Kurvers being the permanent GM. I'm not sure he's even really being fully considered. He was somebody that Paul Fenton brought in. Not to say that they're necessarily going to clean house with all of Fenton's guys, but even Paul Fenton's son right now is working with the organization as well. He came in as a scout and then ended up being elevated, which was another part of the situation that I know internally a lot of people weren't overly pleased about. But either way, I think Minnesota's going to be all quiet right now. So a lot of the rumors we've discussed about them as of late, I think can kind of go by the wayside, and we're not going to be seeing any activity for the short term. Now we have updates on both the Vancouver and Edmonton situations respectively, and let's get started first here with Jesse Puljujarvi and the Edmonton Oilers. Now, right now Puljujarvi's over in his native country of Finland, and he was recently interviewed at a charity event. Here's the headline that came out from the news story after the interview took place. It basically says Jesse Puljujarvi tells the interview with the Finnish newspaper that I want to start fresh with another team. I will not go back to North America and play with the Edmonton Oilers, essentially. Playing in North America is still his goal. He wants to stay in Finland until he has a contract in place, and if he doesn't get one, he'll find a way to play somewhere overseas, which is basically him just reiterating what he was saying before, kind of doubling down here. But there does not seem to be any movement out of Jesse Puljujarvi. No give here at all. The fact that they have a new GM in Edmonton, they have a new coach. I know there were certainly some Oilers insiders that I follow closely on social media that seem to be very optimistic that things could change, and Jesse Puljujarvi very well might still end up coming to terms on a short-term contract as a restricted free agent here with the Edmonton Oilers, coming to training camp and likely earning himself a third-line right wing spot with the organization. Obviously, they don't have a lot of depth on the wings, and he likely would get himself a roster spot if he were to sign and come to training camp. But Ultimately, he's convinced that playing in Edmonton is not good for him, and he's insisting and demanding a fresh start. Otherwise, he's just going to stay over in Finland. And you know what? That might even be the best move for the Oilers, is to let him play over there, see if he can have himself a good season and regain some value. They very well might be able to get a much better trade package and moving him on to another team at that point, because right now, just the value probably isn't really there for what they'd like to get in return. He's not very established in the NHL, hasn't had a whole lot of success. Now, another thing to keep in mind as well from the Oilers' perspective is that this player would no longer be waivers exempt. So if they sign him to a new contract and they were able to convince him to come back and play in Edmonton, if things don't work out early on and they said, you know what, he really needs more time in the minor leagues, they can't send him down without waivers. And I think another team would take a chance on him through the waiver wire, where they don't have to give up any other assets in order to acquire the player. So they certainly would be at risk to lose him for nothing should they bring him into the fold, play him, and if things aren't quite ready to keep him in the NHL, then he very well will be gone to another NHL team. So there is that risk involved as well. So I'm not real sure we're going to see the Oilers pushing too hard to get him under contract. Obviously, they're not going to trade him for just anything. The deal has to make sense. So I really think Ken Holland is going to be stubborn on this case here, and if he can't find the right deal, he's going to let him play in Europe, let him boost his value rather than have him come to Edmonton, maybe not work out here yet again, and then obviously risk losing him on waivers. But of course, that would only be if Puljujarvi would agree to it in the first place, and it sounds like he's kind of doubling down on his stance that he's demanding a trade, and there's just no way he's going back to Edmonton and can't be convinced to do so. Jumping over and taking a look at the Loui Eriksson situation with the Vancouver Canucks, head coach Travis Green recently was interviewed, did a Q&A here with Sportsnet, and let's take a look at some of the questions he was asked in regard to the situation with Loui Eriksson and what his answers were. The part of the interview you see on the screen here begins after they were talking about Brock Boeser signing his contract and coming to terms with the team. So this question leads in and said, when he does sign, it will be for a big number, which makes Eriksson's $6 million cap hit more onerous. Were you surprised by what he said at the Worlds? Green, what did he say? That we didn't have trust and see eye to eye? Sportsnet says that you didn't get along 100% and that you don't trust him the way his previous coaches did. Green then responds and says, I was surprised it came out publicly, but I'm not surprised that he isn't happy about certain things. Players are proud. They want to play well and want to have individual success. I understand Loui hasn't scored as much as he wanted to and maybe played at times as much as he wanted to. I understand that, and we've discussed that. But it happens a lot in the NHL. I like to think I have an open door policy and try to be as honest with players as I can. Loui and I have talked about his play, and I know he's frustrated. Sportsnet then asks, have you talked to him about what he said? Travis Green responds and says, I haven't talked to Loui yet, but I'm sure I will talk to him when I see him. This next question from Sportsnet says, room for Loui under the salary cap is one issue, but is there still room for him on your team? Travis Green's answer to this says, Loui, I respect his career. I know he wants to probably play better than he has and have more success for himself. But I still have a job to do, and my job is to put the best team on the ice and play guys I see fit, and not just based on salaries. I want players who will do anything in their power to help the Vancouver Canucks win. That's all they care about, being a Canuck and helping us win. With the additions of some forwards, we've got some tough decisions to make, and he's no different than any other player coming into camp. So obviously it goes to show that Travis Green and the Vancouver Canucks are not going to necessarily bring Eriksson back and play him just because of his contract. At the same time, though, they really do need the salary cap space. We've seen other reports out of Vancouver today suggesting that Brock Boeser is looking for a contract of around $7 million. That, to me, seems very reasonable, and if they can come to terms on that, that will certainly go a long ways to getting him signed and kind of helping their salary cap situation a little bit. But no matter how you shake it, they do need to make some space here, and getting rid of that Eriksson's contract would go a long way to really helping this team quite substantially. At the same time, though, if he does go to training camp and doesn't earn himself a roster spot, the worst that can happen here is that they can put him down to minors. They will only get a little bit of salary cap relief, though, a little bit over $1 million, and that's not really going to help them with their overall situation. As we've discussed here many times, finding a trade for Eriksson is likely going to prove extremely difficult. We've seen numerous other bad contracts be swapped with other teams throughout this offseason. I'm not sure there's really a whole lot left on the market that it would make sense for them to trade to where they can maybe take back another not so favorable contract, but yet still accomplish what they need to do when it comes to the salary cap to get Brock Boeser signed and complete their moves for this offseason. So let me know what you think down in the comments. Do they need to move this Eriksson contract not only for the salary cap space, but just to get rid of the distraction from the team and make sure that everything's happy and healthy in that locker room and that it's not going to impact the rest of the team. Of course, as always, let me know your thoughts on everything we discussed here today, and we'll continue the conversation down in the comment section. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it as well. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I will catch you next time.